Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for your patience. My name is Brittany Edwards, and I am a user experience researcher with Yahoo. And while I work for Yahoo now and currently, I just do want to clarify that the ideas and perspectives and everything that I'm sharing today is solely me and is unaffiliated with Yahoo and does not represent any of their perspectives or all of those legal things. So I just wanted to make sure to kind of give that disclaimer and clarify everything. And another kind of order of business housekeeping that I do want to touch on is that in September, I was asked to outline the topic and takeaways for my session today, but 8 months was a long time to marinate on the concept of what does it mean to build an intentional future. And so the flavor of my thoughts, if you will, got deeper and more complex over time. And as a result, kind of shifted that what you will learn and the takeaway part of this conversation. And so you're probably thinking, okay, that's a cute analogy, but what does it really mean? And what that means and what that looks like for us today is a de-emphasis on upcycling research for evergreen findings and a little bit more creatively touching on benchmarking to track improvements over time. And with only about 40 minutes, because I do want to leave some time for questions at the end, some of the concepts that I talk about today will have to stay a little bit closer to the surface, and some things might come across as half-baked because I had to cut out a lot of detail. There's so much to say, it's a little time, but I do hope it's still as gratifying as cookie dough. And with that, again, I want to thank you for your understanding and for spending some of your time with me here today, and I want to get started. The first thing I wanted to do was to take some time to get to know you all a little bit better. I know Joe mentioned that there was a poll over on the other side of the chat, and I just want to get an understanding of what your level of familiarity with UX research is. So if you could please respond in the poll about whether you identify a little bit more as a seed with little to no past UX research exposure, but perhaps some awareness of the concepts, more of a sprout with some experience applying UX research concepts, maybe collaborating with a research team, or more in the shrub category with medium to high experience planning, conducting, synthesizing. Maybe you are a UX researcher or you were in a past life. And when it seems like just about everyone is responded, Joe, I'd love if you could give me a glimpse into what the majority seem to lean into, which category.
Well, let's see. So far, the top vote getter is shrub, medium to high. Then sprout, and let's see, one person was at the seed. So it looks like you have some people with some familiarity with this area.
Yeah, that is lovely. And that's really good context to know because it means that I could probably spend a little bit more time on the second piece. And so my conversation is broken down into two parts today. I first wanted to talk about UXR, what it is, and then how to use it to design intentionally. But seems like we have a pretty strong user experience research crowd, but I still do want to take some time to just level set and make sure our understanding of user experience research is all kind of coming from the same foundation, and then still move into that space of how to infuse the design process with user experience research and to use it a little bit more intentionally. So first off, again, we're all a little bit more on the sprout or the shrub side, but for the sprouts and seeds, user experience research really centers a little bit more on that human behavior and how human behavior influences the way that people then move and interact with product. And it has a commonly considered fraternal twin called market research or consumer insights. And consumer insights first / market research, if we think about what the similarities and differences are to user experience research. There is a lot of overlap, but if I were to distill these into a type of explain like I'm five using these three orbs of people, product, and business, then market research would more so focus on the relationship between products and business as influenced by people, whereas user experience research would lean a little bit more into understanding how the relationship between people and their interactions with products influences businesses. Again, this is a very, very simple way to explain one of the many different types of research in terms of how they all interconnect people, product, business. But from a business perspective, the value of user experience research is takes a little bit more time to communicate, but it really is in de-risking product decisions, which ultimately would save the company, resources like time and money, because on its best days, user experience research looks like first understanding people's needs and frustrations and using that understanding to then build solutions. It's a lot of touchy-feely stuff that surprisingly holds a lot of space in tech and business decisions, because without people, many of our products just wouldn't really have a purpose, and the business priority benefits from the people priority and people's perceptions of our products, like their usability or their relevance to their personal lives. So how much is this connecting to their needs, frustrations, goals, motivations, really drives satisfaction or trusts, what ultimately leads to business goals like revenue or cost savings, because they're either referring others or they're more willing to spend with the company due to increased loyalty. And so for what the UX process really looks like, I'd imagine a lot of us are familiar that there are these two spaces. There's, that problem space, and then there's the solution space. And more formally called generative research in the problem space, or formative research, and in the solution space, you might also hear evaluative or summative. And in that problem space, we're really trying to focus on what should we be building, and then in the solution space, trying to understand if we're building it correctly. And so a lot of the time that starts with a challenge, like people canceling their subscriptions, but we don't know why, which lends to research and synthesis that defines the problem, right? Like, what are the unmet needs and pain points? And then that leads us into a space of considering what a solution might look like, and then iterating on that design to make sure that we've delivered it, that we've built it correctly before we ultimately deliver a solution. And in theory, this process looks really clean cut and linear, but really the research process is more continuous and cyclical, and it doesn't always start with a known challenge. And a lot of the times our well-intended product designers and product managers are very eager to start with solutions, which have their pitfalls. But ultimately, what the application of UX research looks like in your organization is going to be really dependent on the team's level of maturity. And this is a very simplified model of UX research maturity, just as a quick way to kind of gauge what the maturity level might be based off of staffing. And the way that UX research is staffed in your organization also implicitly communicates stakeholder buy-in. And we could have several 40 minutes worth of conversations about the details of UX research maturity leveling and how to move into the next phases, what those phases really look like. But that's not in scope for today. I just wanted to take some time to illustrate that in a lower level of UX research maturity, people are more likely to use UX research only to check a box or to validate their hypotheses, rather than having those features developed with people at the center that we really see happen when we move into that problem space or that generative space. And in these lower maturity environments, you're more likely to have decision makers championing DIY research without the awareness of all the value that a dedicated research team provides to the business. That's not to suggest that UX research is rocket science, but there's so many things that we as trained researchers know to consider, not only from a confirmation bias perspective, but how all the other biases might impact recruitment or the design of the study or how we synthesize our results. And beyond, the nitty gritty of knowing which methods to use when and what type of data we should be collecting and all of that, those details from study design to delivering synthesis, dedicated research teams can also help to centralize research and mitigate rework across the organization, which is the biggest issue in the user experience research field. And so, instead of spending twice the time, effort, or money on studies, the research team can identify how to best reactivate relevant research or identify the types of research that are evergreen, which tend not to be research that product team or designers might focus on, whereas that research tends to be a lot more tactical and narrow in focus about very, very specific designs. When we graduate into those levels of maturity and understand generative research, which is a lot more centered and rooted on core values of human behavior, then is when we can identify those types of evergreen findings and truths of human behavior that can apply across multiple studies. Not suggesting that research should be gatekept. In fact, having other research teams, trained in research creates more agile environments and buy-in, but in the same respect, we do need to think more critically about how DIY research might take away focus from the other core skills that teammates are intended to support the team with, and the time that it really takes to prepare someone with the adequate skill set or training wheels even to perform UX research in a way that puts people at the center. So it begins with listening and emphasizing and having that one-to-one human connection, and then comes in all of this experience and context that we have from an anthropological side of things, from just genuinely being curious about the psychology and behavioral economics that influence the type and how much quantitative or qualitative data that we gather, that we can ultimately assess and put into human-centered solutions that enhance people's experiences and meet business goals, of course, because that has to be a part of things. But this is the human-centered process that enables businesses to de-risk products. And I'm off that soapbox now. This is probably the choir that I'm over here preaching and singing to, but you're probably wondering who hurt me. I am just really passionate about creating good experiences. But that passion gets me to start thinking about, what does a good user experience really mean? And this is when we get into the meat and potatoes, vegetarian friendly, if you are vegetarian or vegan. So first, I want to start with this framework in the UX research field called the jobs to be done. And the idea is that people hire a product to help them accomplish a task as a means to their end goal. In the same way that some people may work, not because they want more work, but because working generates money, which then they can use to accomplish their end goals or their actual goals, like food and shelter and increased quality of life. And so a lot of the times we tend to think about our products in a vacuum, like our products are the sun and the people just happen to be here for a good time running around the solar system. But in that jobs to be done context, we can see that it's less about, how do we create the best product ever? Because the product isn't actually what people want. The product is serving utilitarian purpose. but rather how do we help people reach their end goals smarter, faster, more sustainably? Because our product is a small piece of their world. And when we begin to think about, how our products interact with and enhance people's lives, we still think about it in a vacuum. And because we tend to think about our products in a vacuum, we're inaccurately categorizing edge cases based off of that narrow focus of the product without really taking into account the greater context of the human experience. When we do this, we can more accurately assess the importance of what we're trying to typically consider edge cases and consider all the ways that technology might be leveraged for interpersonal harm, or how technological advancements or designs might further marginalize our most vulnerable populations. Right now, I'm working in the finance sector. And so with all of the Chat GPT and generative AI craze, I can't help but think about what that does for marginalized communities, because from a business perspective, it's always going to be to put the greatest services behind a paywall, which will further drive a wedge for inequity. And so all of those kind of recent developments, again, over the past 8 months, started to get me to think a little bit more intentionally about what edge cases are, how we approach them, and how we might solve for them, or how we should think about them. And I thought that maybe looking at edge cases from a holistic frame can extend, beyond that conversation of how frequently does this problem occur within our product, and a little bit more into a consideration of severity. And a severity that considers frequency still, yes, but frequency outside of our product and frequency in addition to impact. And maybe for severity, for frequency, we can leverage statistical data as secondary research source to make informed decisions. And I'm not going to lie and say that statistics are perfect. They definitely have some pitfalls and shortcomings, but they really are a step up from throwing darts in the dark and hoping something sticks, which is pretty much what we're doing at this time. So maybe frequency can be influenced by some resources and of statistics and what this really looks like in our population. And maybe for severity, we can think about frequency and impact having different weights. Maybe the weight is 30% to 70%, or maybe the split looks like more of a 40-60. Perhaps there's some room to further outline and define these frequency and impact scales. But for starters, we could look at frequency on a 5-point scale. That's actually really 4 points, from never to always. And maybe we can think about impact on a similar 5-point scale. That's actually 4 points, from none to catastrophic. And it feels really wrong and uncomfortable to qualitatively code things like human rights violations into one of these buckets of none to minor to moderate to major to catastrophic. But my hope is that maybe this type of framework could be a step towards a progressive direction. And my ideas and potential solutions that I'm proposing here are not backed by, rigorous research of saturation points and confidence level, but rather my hope is to start a conversation about how we might be able to begin aligning more on the importance of edge cases and creating clearer systems so that we can spend a little bit less time negotiating for whether or not edge cases are worth designing for. And so what we can do is use this system or build off of this system of looking at the frequency at a 30% rating. Again, maybe that looks a little bit more like 60-40. Maybe it is 50-50. I wouldn't imagine so, because impact tends to matter more than frequency from my own perspective. But that's, again, another whole 40 minutes of conversation and discussing. But what you could do is choose a rating from 1 to 5 or 0 to 4 for frequency, and add that or multiply that by 0.3% to represent the 30%. And do the same thing for the impact. Choose a number from 0 to 4 that represents generally kind of on that scale where something might land, multiply it by 0.7% to represent 0.7 to represent 70%. Add those together to come to a severity score. Clearly, this isn't perfect because there are decimal points involved. And so how do you do a 3.45? Like, do you round that up to a 4, or do you leave that down to a 3? And so naturally, as researchers, when we think about qualitative research, there's a lot of room for definition and using guts to understand, like, what tips the scale and how should we really make these lines, and is this impact strong enough to move something completely into the catastrophe level, even if the frequency is extremely low. And that would be my idea. If something on the impact scale is rated catastrophic, regardless of the frequency, it would be a catastrophe. And so again, catastrophe would be representative of threats to human life, or threats to life. I did say, I didn't specify human's life, because again, whole other conversation about how we create systems of validity for what life is and how we protect life, but another conversation for another time. But with this framework of severity for edge cases, we can begin to think a little bit less about what a good user experience within our product looks like, and a little bit more about what a good humanity experience looks like, because similarly to products, people also don't exist in a vacuum, but rather in a social system. And if we don't consider design from this full perspective, then what kind of future are we optimizing for? Is it human ethics? Sustainability? Right now, it's probably profit, but at what cost? Because similarly to user experience research, a good humanity experience ties to business impact. I think the time to see that is a little bit longer than the time to see it with user experience research, but businesses often give a very strong Leo energy where, the focus is all on the product and how can we maximize people's usage of our product without considering how it could actually be detrimental to a person's life and the social systems that we operate in. And so sometimes this looks like creating addictive products that are actually unhealthy to the overall quality of life for humans, which end up being counterproductive to business goals. And what this looks like is people recognize that, okay, this product is addictive and it's disruptive to the other parts of my system, the other parts of my life that I want to put more attention on, which leads to this experience of dissatisfaction and mistrust. And so then people will begin to limit their product use or avoid a product altogether. I know that's personally my experience with TikTok. I had it downloaded for, I don't know, probably less than 24 hours. And I just realized how addictive it was and disruptive, like, to my own other goals that I'm trying to accomplish in life. And it was off. I do not have TikTok, do not use TikTok. I'm not interested in TikTok. And what that's doing to the business is impacting churn and decreased revenue. And we are seeing this social shift towards protecting our mental health and what that looks like in the ways that we interact with technology. And so while the beginning to end line of this kind of return on the investment of focusing on humanity experience is happening in a longer timeline than it is with user experience research. Ultimately, the humanities' best interest will lead to business interests. And so there's a lot of conversations that need to be had about what is just enough for businesses and how can businesses still meet all of their revenue goals in relation to that just enough. And maybe that looks like diversification in terms of meeting other people's needs, because more often than not, our products right now aren't designed for people to accomplish multiple jobs within one. And so maybe what this kind of just enough and healthy usage of product can look like is, instead of focusing on how to overextend people's engagement with this one aspect of our product, how do we create products that touch into all of people's lives and all of their needs and all of their motivations? And so focusing a little bit back more on how humanity experience impacts return on investment. I started to speak about my own experience with TikTok, but I know several other people and friends who have resulted into this self-regulation, where people start to try to manage their wellness by setting, app time limits, or using web browsers instead of downloading the applications on their phones, or even avoiding products altogether, because that lack of accountability from the business perspective is shifting the responsibility onto people. And it's a lot like when car tires were calibrated for comfort rather than safety. And so focusing on people as the center rather than focusing on the systems that people are a part of as the center. And in the beginning, car companies were just saying, we should teach people to be better drivers. And as some statistics might be able to tell you, we didn't learn how to be better drivers. And there are probably a lot of psychological reasons as to why we as people tend to not be the best at protecting our own experiences. And so what that really creates and moves us into is this question of, like, is it really my responsibility to think of all of humanity when I'm designing or when I'm researching? And the question to remember is that if you don't, who will? And in some regards, we are all humanities keepers. So we do need to consider those unhappy paths and what those edge cases might be, and considering edge cases not as they relate to our product, but as they relate to our society at large. Because if you think about it, so many safety considerations are edge cases that don't really focus on frequency, but instead on impact. And if you think about airplane crashes and the frequency of those occurring, I am so glad and grateful that somebody didn't consider it an edge case, because it's rare to happen, but rather focused on the impact of what would happen in the event of a crash landing or an emergency landing or some type of emergency. And when you think about technology from that lens as well, we need to be applying those same thoughts. We need to be, in other words, keeping that same energy, because the repercussions of not thinking thoroughly through the humanity experience for technology is much harder to grasp in comparison to the airplane or car examples. But that doesn't make the importance any less real. And the facelessness of technology is also making it easier to assume anonymity and distance from social responsibility. It's, a tragedy of the commons where no one is really responsible, and there's this process of things going worse and worse and worse, and deregulation and all of these circumstances where no one's taking responsibility. But we as researchers and designers and experience builders are uniquely positioned for moving towards compassionate design that's not built, top down, but rather from the ground up with people and the societies that we live in at the center. And the more that we can shift from who we're designing for to who we're designing and building with, the closer we are to creating an intentional future. That is all I have for today. I just want to thank you all so much for listening to me and my soapbox, and would love to open up the floor to any conversations that might have come in, or any conversation or any questions that still might be on the table that you'd like to explore and talk more about.
Yeah, I can take a look at that for you, Brittany. Thanks so much for leading us through this. I just had one question to kind of get things started. Is working within the structure that you've represented here in your own organization, like where is like the responsibility lie in deciding, what's the appropriate way? I mean, is it mainly held within, your role or your department, or does it require some, broader understanding of what's appropriate in terms of how to do your metrics?
Mm. What I will say is that I've noticed that people who transition into the research world from other disciplines tend to add the most value to the perspectives that we have in research, in terms of how thoroughly we're thinking through edge cases and how much we need to consider them. And so realizing from the people around me, inspiring me to kind of grow in my understanding and expanding my perception of what a user experience really is and what a humanity experience is, it feels like the responsibility for awareness is on the design and kind of research side, but it's also a lot about the decision makers and what they value and what they care about, because in as much as from the bottom up we want to make change and create change, we really need buy-in from the top coming down that also values and understands the change as well. And so ideally it can be a situation where the people who are closest to the product, like the designers and researchers, can identify focus areas that we could show to the business leaders who fundamentally hold the same values as us and can help us see through those support for those edge cases that we're considering. And so a lot of it is rooted in a social humanity driven, like love for humanity, love for improving people's experiences and people's lives holistically.
All right, and let's see, we have a question from Angel. Let's see, oh, it wasn't a question, just a comment. Dark pattern products never work out for anyone long term. Let's see, I'm looking to see, we haven't had any other questions yet. If you have any questions for Brittany, just type those into the chat and we can address those. And we can just hang out for a moment and see if there are any other questions. Yeah, let me ask you another one. Does the format or process that you presented here, does that tend to work in all the different areas of the products that you support, or then does it change depending on different business goals for different activities that you do research on?
Research, generally speaking, by and large, tends to not be a copy and paste process. And there's always a need to adjust the method that we use and the way that we frame and contextualize things based off of, the specific scenario, which is very similar to what we do as people researchers. There's not this kind of panacea, this one-hit wonder that we can splash onto everything. But I would say that the system of their framework could still be applicable, but maybe the pieces in terms of how they work. So for example, that system of a framework I leveraged from trying to understand how should we consider the design implications in terms of how they help certain personas or certain people groups that we're focusing on, and how they might hurt people groups. And so that framework of trying to understand, okay, what percentage, how much weighting does this one particular thing matter, like impact, and how does that relate to the weighting for frequency, and what is a total score that we can see at the end of this, and how can we use that score to understand where we are now and where we want to be in the future. And so you could use the system and framework to kind of benchmark your humanity experience research score in terms of seeing all of the things that were edge cases that were high level that you then reduced down, or you were able to focus on and allocate time and resources to better support.
All right. Well, we have a question from Brianna. How do you move the needle in UX or UXR immature organizations? So I guess ones that just aren't as quite as progressive as what you've portrayed here.
Yeah, so there's a lot of everything into where your UX maturity level is, and where your current level is going to impact the steps that you need to take to move into the next phase. There are a lot of UX research maturity level matrices out there, and some of the times they need to be kind of tailored to your own fit and organization. But what the high level answer to that is strong UX leaders that educate stakeholders for buy-in. Generally speaking, UX teams are in lower maturity levels because the people who are in leadership positions don't fully understand or know the value of UX research and how to apply it properly. And so there really is that need for education. And at my company, and I know some other companies, whenever a director of research or a senior manager of research is maybe new to the organization, or they realize that there is a need for it on the teams, there's a deck that they go around with as a roadshow of like what user experience is, what it isn't, how to best use it, what are the pitfalls for it. And a lot of the times having that education really helps move the needle for stakeholders to value research and then to build up the maturity level of the team. I feel like by and large, when you are at the absolute lowest level of UX research maturity or very close to it, there's a lot more need to prove the return on investment. And so a lot of that is more focused on drawing that direct line from user happiness all the way to revenue, and showing them, this is where we started with this, touchy-feely subject about people, and this is how it's impacting your bottom line. And over time, having that clear-cut understanding of, wow, this is actually creating a lot of value for us, then is the piece of creating buy-in, because it does take time and money for them to build out a UX research organization. But by and large, it's just about having informed leaders. And when I say informed leaders, I'm also not speaking about specifically UX research leaders, but you do need an informed leader to educate the stakeholders. But it also is about having informed stakeholders from the product team and the design team that are also champions of research. And so really the roadshow is about targeting those people who ultimately open up their pockets for us.
All right. Well, it looks like we've gotten through a lot of great content today. So thank you very much, Brittany, for sharing your experiences and your process. And we'll hopefully look forward to working with you again. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.